right, friends, we're back to talk about the conjunction of Saturn and Venus. Lovely Venus and the grumpy old Saturn. This will be fun. If you have this in your natal chart, this applies. However, I'm going to also connect this to the upcoming transit where Venus is actually going to go retrograde in the sign of Aries, go back and forth and hit Saturn 3 times. This is a once in a lifetime event, and I think it's worth talking about it. I also talked about Venus in Pisces in general and the upcoming transit of Venus in the previous video. So check that video out. I'll link it somewhere around this video. And that one is strictly about what is the symbolic meaning and how we can interpret Venus in Pisces. But now in this oceanic cosmic ocean of love, because Venus is there, we have the cosmic dam and the ice cube maker, which is Saturn. So let's have a look at that today and see what the general signification of this signature is, which is Venus, Saturn, and Pisces, and how to interpret this in the birth charts and within the transits. And before moving on, one last thing. For articles that I post, which are more full length and in depth, go to my website at parisayazi.com. There you can also find my readings, courses, and anything that's coming up. And if you like this content, please comment, like, subscribe, because that's what the algorithm needs to know that I exist, that you exist, and your comments, I always use them as case studies, especially if you tell me your narrative and your experiences, which is of utmost value to me. With that said, let's move on. So as I discussed in the last video, generally, when we talk about Venus and Pisces, Venus is exalted. That means Venus is dignified. Venus is empowered. So we're talking about a great placement in the chart. In a sense, Venus in Pisces wants deep, selfless, unifying, merging love, the ultimate kind of love that we could call it a divine love, which is very hard to achieve and attain when we think about it. I've said this in other videos. Most of us love like the way Venus is in Virgo. We have to deal with each other's imperfections, flaws. We have to constantly negotiate, evaluate things. You know, there's separation between us. And it's to arrive to that point in life where you can actually dissolve those separations and merge with another person. It is one of the most Herculean tasks a human being can do, because we're talking about so many different components of the self that needs to be entrenched and in place, and understanding how other humans function and to have a great sense of compassion and understanding before we can actually do this act of love that transcends human love. So when Venus is in Pisces, it wants that transcendent love, but it's going to have its shadow side, and having Saturn there is really going to show us what that is and what love in reality is to us and how we negotiate and grapple with it, and the discrepancy between the fantasy and the idealized and the real and the practical. So that's what I'm going to mainly discuss in this video. But before moving on, I want to bring something to your attention, which I personally found super interesting. So I was fast forwarding the chart, going back and forth, trying to figure out when was the last time or what will be the next time that Saturn will be in Pisces. Venus is going to station retrograde in Aries, go back to Pisces and hit Saturn. Couldn't find it. And I think I went back a couple of hundred years and forward a couple of hundred years. So Saturn by itself comes to the sign of Pisces around every 28 years, and Venus will conjunct it. But to have this dynamic that's happening right now, it's not going to happen again in our lifetime. And I couldn't even find the last time. So if anyone knows that date, forward or backwards, please put in the comment below. I'd love to know. I know in certain traditions, when they talk about karma and the crop of karma coming up, or that you have taken your birth in this lifetime because there are certain things that are supposed to happen that can transpire, that will transpire in this life, this signature is one of them. Right. And it has so much to do with our relational dynamics and our conceptualization of love and how we love. And I think a part of being human, for most humans, is to love and to be loved. It's one of the greatest themes. Like when you look at music, I would say 80% of it is about love, is about this aspect of the human condition that defines the quality of our lives and our experiences. So now, all of us 8 billion people living in this time, we are about to experience something very profound and rare. And hopefully, We have it within us to learn and to internalize the lessons that will come from it. And then it's worth remembering with this transit, I will talk about just the signature of Venus and Saturn conjunct, which will be relevant to anyone who has this signature. And people who are around 30 years old right now, 27 to 30, will likely, if they're born in particular months, are likely to have this signature in their chart. But I just want us to remember how rare this transit is, because not only Venus is going to do this whole retrograde dance from Aries to Pisces and then forward again, there's so many things happening in that time span that is just insane, because North Node Rahu sitting there, Neptune sitting there, Venus stations in the sign of Aries while Sun is making a conjunction with Saturn, Rahu, and Neptune. And then Mercury is going to go retrograde from Aries back to Pisces, where it's a debilitated Mercury, and it's pretty much inaugurating the movement of Venus back into Pisces. So it's loaded. That's what I'm saying. This signature is one of those that we should pay attention to and see what kind of life lessons it's unfolding for us, what kind of experiences are coming up, and how we perceive and experience them. And just to give you a little heads up about the dates, Venus is going to hit Saturn, because that's the topic of our discussion today, 3 times during this transit. So in its forward motion, it's going to hit Saturn for the first time on January 18th, 19th of 2025. And then once when it's in its retrograde motion and moving from Aries back to Pisces for the first time, and its retrograde motion is going to hit Saturn again on April 6th of 2025. And here's the kicker. It's pretty much stationing on top of Saturn. They're about 2 degrees apart when Venus stations to go direct. And they perfect their conjunction at the same degree while Venus is going direct on April 24th of 2025. So we can see there's a kind of an intensity with this conjunction that involves Venus and Saturn. So now let's just get into the symbolic meaning of what Venus and Saturn conjunct generally mean, what kind of life lessons it might be unfolding, what kind of experiences that it might be bringing to the forefront, and how to navigate it. So first thing, I want you to have a look at your natal chart. Look at the house where Pisces occupying that particular house. So it's talking about that domain of life and the kind of people that it includes. And why do I say people? Because Venus is a relational planet. Mercury is also a relational planet. Mercury is trying to establish relationship. Venus is trying to connect and become very close and merge. It's like a partnership now with Venus. So every house, if you actually pay attention to it, it is not only speaking about some sphere or domain of life, but is also talking about the kind of people that would be in that sphere and domain of life. Like in the second house, we're talking about our family members, our lifelong friends that are like our family members, people that generally provide us support and stability. Third house, it represents your siblings, for example, your competitors. Fourth house is pretty self-explanatory. People within our family dynamic. 10th house, our career, for example, those kinds of people. So all the houses are representing certain kind of people. And since Venus is a relational planet, that's something we have to take into consideration for translation of Venus in general. Yes, it can also have to do with our enjoyment, sense of pleasure, sensual perceptions, because Venus has other significations, our sense of creativity. But even in those domains, because this is a relational planet, it's talking about how we are able to connect and merge with different facets of life. So I'm going to verbalize this talk in terms of people, like the beloved, our relationship, people we are in that kind of a relationship with. But you can also take into consideration that domain of life and the people that it involves. Just wanted to bring that to the forefront as something to contemplate or just let it play in the background, because this will give us nuances and a fuller picture of what's happening with this transit, or in general, if you have this in your natal chart as a signature. As I was saying earlier, Venus's kind of love in its exalted form in the sign of Pisces is looking to merge and create a sense of oneness through its function of establishing connections and unions. Now we're going to talk about Saturn sitting here. in the sign of Pisces, which is going to show us the struggles that are going to emerge in this process of loving, merging, connecting, creating that sense of oneness and wholeness, that all the parts are integrated into one whole. That's what an artwork is. Like, for example, Venus represents the arts or creations. When we're talking about a canvas, we're talking about merging all these lines, all these colors, the composition, the proportion of it. We're bringing everything into a kind of a unity, to a comprehensive whole that now has an expression. And now it can express something and we can experience it again. So when we bring Saturn here, Saturn's going to be like, let's have a look at the parts. Let's see where the boundaries are between things. Let's see how things are separated. So Saturn's function here is actually to challenge Venus with this notion. And I would say at the bottom of it, it is not to torment us, but to actually make us realize these gaps that we have in understanding love. Venus's love is selfless at its ultimate form, especially in the sign of Pisces. Saturn's going to point out to us where we are actually selfish in loving other people, where we are actually tormenting ourselves and other people in the name of love. These are some of the things that this conjunction is going to bring to the forefront. For instance, Saturn's going to show us what it means to love the actual and the real person, not the idealized version of it. Saturn's going to show us this partner that you expect them to be like this, you expect them to do that, or you expect love to look like this. Here's a person who's actually dirty in these aspects of life. Here's where they are imperfect, full of flaws, where it's at complete antithesis to what you think love should be like or look like. Can you deal with that? So in a sense, Saturn is going to show us where our own limitations are in loving and connecting with other people, or to that facet of life which is represented by the house where Pisces is sitting in our chart. So Saturn's going to pose an ultimate question to us, which is, can you transcend the boundaries while maintaining the structure of your own personal integrity and the integrity of another, and accept them as who they are and accept yourself as who you are? And are you able to establish that kind of oneness and merging under these kinds of conditions? Because we are human and we are living with that human condition. So we can't work our way backward from the ideal to the real. We have to start with the real and work our way, grow and mature up to the ideal. So this is what Saturn's trying to show us. Essentially, what Saturn wants from us is realism in these relational dynamics. Because we've got to understand Saturn values practicality, realism again, being rational, pragmatic. Saturn does not do ideals and idealization and fantasies, and Saturn's not about that, not one bit. It's always going to challenge such things. So in this context, or in this sense, Saturn's really trying to look at ourselves and see our capacity and to what degree we are actually capable of loving selflessly. We make a lot of claims in loving other people and in being loved, but Saturn's going to be like, are you actually that person? Let's have a look. And if you can't, we're going to have to find some real life applications to alter these modes and ways of being. And one of the ways that Saturn's going to bring the sense of realism forward, one of the things that is going to do right off the bat is going to create situations where accountability becomes very necessary. Taking ownership for your own flaws as a flawed human being, as an imperfect human being, into the forefront, rather than that projecting that we do, that we want to say, hey, the partner is flawed. The partner is imperfect. That's why I can't have this kind of love, or I can't have this kind of connection, or why this relationship's not working. So in a sense, Saturn's trying to bring a bit of disillusionment to our illusions. So I talk about this in the previous video. I touch on it in terms of how Venus in Pisces, even though it's exalted, before it gains its own sense of maturity, like the native who has this in their charts, they have a romanticized notion of love, for example. They're looking for a transcendent love, divine love. I just want us to be as one. You know, people use those terms of twin flame and uh twin flame. I can't remember the other word, but there's another word that people use to explain these connections that are so divine and out of this world. This is kind of like a Venus in Pisces lens. In some ways, love is perceived as something very mystical and magical, is some chemistry that happens in the air, and there's all of this connectivity. But in reality, love has a lot of practical work that goes into it every day. And I would argue Saturn's trying to show us that. So it's trying to take that rose-colored glasses off, that romanticized notion of what love ought to be and what love actually is on ground zero of experience as human beings. Saturn wants to show us that human love is not transcendent to begin with. Love is something you learn. Love is something that you work hard on. That love is messy, flawed, and deeply imperfect a lot of time, that we're imperfect, that our partners are imperfect. In a sense, Saturn's bringing a sobering quality to Venus, where Venus wants to actually feel drunk on love. And this confrontation of Saturn with Venus is a difficult one. It's uncomfortable because Saturn's going to start stripping away all of our illusions and is going to demand of us to be realistic and to have a sense of realism about what it means to be in a relational dynamic with another human being. And specifically with Venus in Pisces, this signature is saying there's going to be difficulty with this perception because that's not what Venus wants to do in Pisces. That's not Venus's job in Pisces. It's like Venus has to come to reconcile the divine love with everyday reality of human relationships, which is full of griminess and there's so much grind in it. And Saturn's here is like, you know what? I want to show you love as a process and not as this end product that you think of how love ought to be. The blessing here is that Venus is going to hit Saturn 3 times. So we have some chances to learn, because if this was like a one-shot deal when Saturn hits when Venus hits Saturn, because Venus moves faster, we can just be left with this feeling of disillusionment, dissatisfaction, unsatisfied. Like, what the hell? This is how love's supposed to be. This is a prominent feeling for people who have this conjunction in their natal chart, for example. They have to grapple with this feeling for the remainder of their life. But in a transit, it can induce this feeling. It can compel certain actions that bring about this kind of a mode within one state of being. It's kind of like Saturn's showing that the dream you have in your head cannot be matched to the actuality of this reality that you're living. So that's where that disillusionment and disenchantment comes from when this conjunction happens. But as I was saying, it's going to hit it 3 times. So we have an opportunity to actually examine and learn what this means and how we can modify our ways or cultivate new ways in understanding what love is and how we connect with other people. And I'm kind of glad that Saturn's there. It just sounds so almost sounds masochistic whenever you are glad that Saturn's doing something with a benefic planet. But I feel it's important because if we have idealized or subconscious idealization of what a partner or a love relationship could look like or should look like, we're essentially projecting our own false attribute onto another human being. And we do this because we want to elevate them to a particular kind of a status where they can do something for us. So we're elevating to a status of a soulmate, twin flames. I really have to remember that other word that people use. I forget every single time. But you know what I mean? Or some sort of a savior. That's not the word, but I'm just saying people will elevate other people in terms of that love context for these reasons. And that's our own projection onto other people. That's not who they are necessarily. That's not what they're supposed to do for us, but we can project this. So in a way, we make the partner an object with a certain kind of a function where they can reflect what we want from them, even though if that's not their quality. This is one of the underlying things in relationships that brings relationships to their knees and to their ends. Because it's an aspirational kind of love in some ways. It's like the fairy tale kind of love that's coming into a head-on clash with reality of life and who we are actually connected to. It's actually disrespecting our partner in a lot of ways, not accepting them for their imperfection and their flaws. And when we do that to other people, when we project those things, we are also assuming that we are ourselves some sort of a perfect creature, that we are entitled to that other perfect creature. So it creates all these barriers where it doesn't allow us to see the realness of the other person and ourselves. By doing this, we basically mask the essence of ourselves and the essence of the other human being by creating these false fantasies that are mediating in between everyone and everything. So I'm saying I like this conjunction with Saturn because Saturn's kind of wanting to show us who we really are, who the other person really is, and start negotiating from that premise rather than the fantasies and the make-believes about who the other person ought to be or what love ought to be or what the function of the lover is or the beloved. I like to think of this as kind of like you get into a relationship, you're not actually appreciating and loving the other person as they are. You're kind of just casting them for a part or role because you have this fantasy in your head about how they ought to be. And Saturn's coming in and it's like your casting sucks, your story sucks, all of it just doesn't work. It doesn't jive. And then Saturn's going to remind us like this person that you think you cast for that role didn't even audition for that role. Like, how did you even cast this person? It's going to challenge us to our core. So in a sense, Saturn's trying to show us what our responsibilities in a relationship is in relation to ourselves, in relation to other people in relation to us. Saturn's redefining here what the story is, what the roles are, what the function of love in general is, how the human being operates, where we're at on the spectrum of our own evolution in this process of love, loving, and being loved. It wants to show us our unrealistic expectations of love in general, of other people, how we make them maybe even subservient to other people, or how we've been made subservient to other people because of their idealism, because of their idealization process. As negating as Saturn is, as much as it's a naysayer, it's actually trying to show us what it means to be human in these love dynamics where we're trying to connect, unify, and merge with other people. It's trying to show us that our projections are essentially saying something about our own unfulfilled needs that we're putting on another person to meet those needs, for example. Where we feel powerless, where we feel inadequate, where we are not enough, and yet, instead of rising to the occasion, making ourselves better as a human being so we can have these qualities and we can perform their actions, we're expecting the person that we casted for the role to do these things for us. Saturn's going to show us how we place our burden on other people to fulfill some sort of a function that we can't do for ourselves, or how other people are doing it to us. So this very much, sorry, I'm keep moving the computer because the wire is like totally tangled around my foot for the microphone. Sorry, yeah. So Saturn wants to show us how we're doing these overcompensation acts in a relational dynamic in our relationships. It's going to show us how we human beings use each other as an instrument and instrumentalize each other, how we are transactional in the name of this love thing and this love story that we've constructed. So in sum, Saturn is trying to bring our heads out of the cloud back into reality and have us look at what actually is rather than how they ought to be or how we want them to be. At this point, I want to talk about like that Jungian concept of shadows and or projections. And in this term, in that Jungian term, our shadows are talking about some aspects of ourselves that we have disowned at some point, or we've suppressed it. And usually this comes early in life because we were not allowed to express that aspect of ourselves. It was repressed, it was suppressed by other people. So it's actually where we felt unlovable or unacceptable, just qualities that we interpreted as something that's not good about us that never got a chance to flap its wings and fly, basically. So when we have Venus in Pisces in this kind of a dynamic, That's where it's coming from, is those our own inner inadequacies, fears, things that have been suppressed that we actually come to project on our partner and our significant other. And it's not because a partner might not even have an ounce of these qualities within them that we're asking of them to perform for us or to be that way. We do this because these are the qualities we desire in ourselves and for ourselves. They're the aspect that we feel that are missing in ourselves, and we're trying to fulfill it by making another person an instrument of this act in our lives. Like, for example, you can see this in the way people talk about, I want unconditional love from my partner. I need to feel masculine, therefore my partner has to be super feminine, or I need to feel super feminine and he needs to be super masculine. Or I'm looking for emotional strength in my partner. I want an independent woman, or I want an independent man, whatever it is. And then these qualities might not actually inherently be in their partner the way that they want it. They're qualities that the person projects onto the person because this is what they want for themselves. In essence, they want to feel a certain way, but because they can't tap into that. Like, for example, a man who says, I need to feel like a man, therefore I need a woman. Essentially, they're saying something about the value of that feminine principle, which we have the masculine and the feminine principle in all of us, but we don't necessarily have access to it at all times in the ways that we need, in the way that will make our lives better. So instead of this man, for example, cultivating the feminine principle or the feminine qualities within themselves, which has to do with receptivity, empathy, care, love, nurturance, they can't do these things for themselves. They're actually handicapped in that area. So they project that onto a woman and they expect her to do that in order to have that need that they cannot meet in themselves for themselves. Saturn's going to disrupt this illusion. That's what Saturn wants to do here right now in this during this transit. It's going to show the discrepancy between what's real and what is projected and a fantasy and not real. And the painful truth here is Saturn's going to prevent, let's say we are with that partner, we're projecting stuff. Let's say there's an argument, something happens, some event happens, and the partner will look at you blank in the eye and say, I am not that person. I will never do that for you because I am not that person. I had enough. Can't do it. There's that ideal gets shattered in that instant, and the person's faced with a tough reality. Do I stay with a person who says, I don't even have this in me, and because I don't have it, I can't do it for you? Do I accept them as this person? Because I do love them, but or does the fantasy and the ideal matter to me more? And I will exchange all the other good qualities, all the loving things that are here, and I will go and look for it somewhere else. So in a sense, Saturn's going to expose these projections. Oh my God, the camera just dropped and the whole thing just moved. So if I'm like, the frame has moved, forgive me. I really have to do something about this wire too. It's insane here. It's insane. All right. And I want to go back to that projection of, let's say, the feminine and the masculine for a second, just to draw you a fuller picture of some ways when I talk about projection and idealizing other people and what it looks like and how unhealthy it is. And in some ways, thank goodness or thank God that Saturn is actually in this movement of Venus and through its retrograde. Because this is a very unhealthy dynamic to have in life. We come to harm ourselves and we actually harm other people. And we don't allow them to be a full expression of their humanity and the entirety of their being. So let's take that person who says, I need to feel masculine. And let's assume this person is a man, just for the sake of simplicity, because these are the stereotypes. And then this man has an idealized vision or version of love, because we always assume women have an idealized version and vision of love, but men do too. And the shadow part of this man who demands of the woman to be, for example, hyper feminine can be related to the fact that the man in this scenario needs to feel his own sense of power, for example. And the way that this man goes about doing this is through enforcing the traditional gender roles, for example. This is what a woman does. This is what a woman's job is. And in this person's mind, the hyper feminine woman that he idealizes is nurturing, yielding, Submissive, yes, baby, yes, honey, anything you say. It's like this one-dimensional being. Because who wants a one-dimensional being? Think about it. It's like you have a puppet and you're a puppeteer. Okay, fun at the beginning, but how long can you do this and make yourself feel amused? You know, it's literally a one-dimensional human being. But one thing that never gets old for all of us human beings is to feel our own power and to feel powerful. So this person's carving out this ideal version of what a woman is and has this expectation because he perpetually wants to have his own sense of power through this dynamic of the gender roles. In a sense, if the woman conforms here, if there's that conformity to his wishes and to his ideal, to that projection, to that shadow of him that's coming out, it's elevating his sense of self and his self concept, which is essentially saying he doesn't have a strong core, a strong sense of self, a strong identity. He needs someone to be in a submissive role in this life in order for him to feel his power. Therefore, he can feel his own sense of self. This is very problematic. We can't just empathize here with the woman. We also have to empathize here with the man who actually has that feeling within himself. And Saturn here in this dynamic is going to show this person in this such a dynamic or in this dynamic that this human being that you're with, they're actually not here as a vessel to demonstrate to you what you actually don't have. You need to figure that out for yourself. So Saturn is going to break this illusion. That's what Saturn wants to do in this transit. It wants to expose the one-sided dynamic and the asymmetrical power relations to the person and how they are projecting this and how this is actually damaging to themselves and the other partner. It's going to do this in a cruel way because that's how Saturn functions. Saturn's always going to do the way Saturn does things. But there's a purpose behind this. I've said this in other videos. What we go through in life is not meant to break us, you know? In reality, sometimes it does because we don't know how to handle it. But if we can, we don't have to break under these conditions, under the cruelty of Saturn. We can actually draw some serious life lessons from it and grow from it. And Saturn's going to show this through its harshness. I mean, the partner here might feel compelled to completely resist the partner, to completely show him how he is an oppressive agent, for example. There could be rebelliousness against a partner. There's an upheaval, there's an uprising. So there's a fight, in other words, in a relationship, and a lot of conflicts that can emerge so that these qualities can be seen. And essentially, Saturn's showing that actual love, what Venus and Pisces is, and the camera fell again, and the wire stuck again. I did not do my setup well today. Yeah, so it's trying to show that true love is not about controlling other people. It's not about exploring your own power and having a sense of power by oppressing another human being. So Saturn's dismantling this fantasy, this projection, this shadow aspect that's within the self. And by doing that, we have an opportunity to see ourselves. So we can integrate those parts and we can work on having authentic sense of self and power. And this is relevant for this transit because this retrograde of Venus will actually commence in the sign of Aries, which has to do with our individuality, our individuation, who we actually are. So we can kind of take this hit from Saturn as a revelation by seeing it through the dynamics it's going to create. And then once when Venus moves into the sign of Aries, maybe for this instance, for the story that I just said, now the individual has an opportunity to start evaluating what does it mean for me to have my own power, my own sense of self, my own autonomy. What if I didn't project these things? What if I cultivated them within myself? So this is what this transit's doing. This is what Saturn's trying to do. Saturn's actually helping us in that sense here. And of course, in a malefic way again. Never take Saturn as a softie and a huggy planet who's just gonna teach you through fluff, not Saturn. In general, Saturn's dynamic in this transit is going to show Venus in Pisces that kind of a paradox. And it's also going to show us other lessons too. Like we can be self-righteous in love, we can be egotistical in love, we can be overwhelming and overpowering in love. Saturn's trying to show us all these messed up ways that we have in our relational dynamics that are actually more damaging to love than accommodating and supporting what love is. As I said, the highest expression of Venus in Pisces is selfless love. But most of us human beings, it's actually not that common to love another person without our ego. You know, sometimes we get into these arguments, for example, in a relationship. It's the ego fighting. It is not, I mean, what you're fighting for an idea, you're fighting for some minor thing. It is the ego trying to affirm itself. It is not selfless. It's literally using another person as an opposition to get what you want to get, to have the last word. So these are the kinds of things that are going to be highlighted with this. And the Sun Saturn is going to show us that, you know what? You're not as selfless as you think. You're pretty selfish. It's going to hold the mirror back onto us and reflect our own picture to us, our own ways of being, so that we see it. And it's very likely that it's going to do that through the people that we do love, the people that are involved in that domain of life where the sign of Pisces is sitting. And you know what? And I was saying Saturn always does Saturn things. All of these dynamics are going to be very disenchanting, unnerving, unsettling. Your expectations are broken. And all of these things inevitably causes emotional pain. It takes a lot to have this idealized notion of who you are and who your romantic partner is, and have that sobering moment where you have to look at them and see someone flawed, see someone imperfect, see yourself that way. And to still have that sense of compassion and acceptance and the willingness to take them on as they are, just because they don't do something that you want them to do. Can you still see the essence of them? Can you still see the soul of them, and to still love them, even though they can't give you that thing that you think that they have to give you? And the Sun Saturn's going to make us confront reality. And the reality of being human is that everything's always incomplete and imperfect. I mean, our lives, the entirety of our lives, as long as we're alive, we ourselves who are living this life, we cannot know what the story is. Our ending is written by other people. That's how imperfect, flawed, and incomplete life in itself is as its experience. You can experience dying. You can't even experience your own death. You know, you can talk about it in terms of like, as a soul, I can, but I'm talking about you as a person that you are right now, experientially, how you understand things, you know, and then to go and make these stories about how love ought to be, that perfection that should come from it, that feeling of completeness that you need to feel from it. It's like you are in charge of your own life and you're actually living it, and you can't have that. And yet you expect that from another person. So these are the things we're going to have to seriously grapple with this conjunction. And they're painful. They're not easy. Like I said, it's very hard to look at the person that you love, and you've always had this expectation that you're going to have this experience with them, or they're supposed to do this for you, or this is where you were supposed to go in life, and life is showing you otherwise. It's challenging you in that moment. Do you actually say you love this person? Do you have the capacity to love the person not as you want them to be, but as they are? This is a lesson that Saturn's going to bring to the forefront. And this is crucial for our growth, to actually be able to learn what it means to love like the way Venus is in the sign of Pisces, which is holistic, which is integrative, which is non-judgmental, which is selfless. So these are, let's say, introduction to love lessons that's going to come from a very brutal, cruel instructor called Mr. Saturn, or Prof. Saturn here. So the way Saturn's going to teach us these lessons, it's going to show us our own fears, inadequacies, insecurities, incapacities, lack of aptitude, our sabotaging subconscious mind, for example, our sabotaging subconscious patterns, our sense of powerlessness. It's going to bring all those components about ourselves and other people into the forefront, and it's going to ask us, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the reality of things? Not how you want things to be, how you fantasize about things, but how things actually are. A romanticized version about love or that sphere of life where Pisces is, it needs to change. It has to become something more real. And it's that realness of it that will allow us to integrate all the parts and to have that sense of acceptance and inclusion. And by doing this, it's usually by doing this that even though the sign of Pisces is about merging things, incorporating them, and almost making things lose their distinction and differentiation. With the conjunction of Saturn here, it's teaching us, even though that's what Venus in Pisces wants to do, and especially since Venus is going to retrograde in the sign of Aries, in the human world and in the human realm, the way to merge with another person is to let another person be the full and the whole and the totality of themselves, and you be that. And through acceptance of all the parts that is your makeup and is of the other person's makeup, because of that acceptance, because of seeing it realistically, now you can start to negotiate and compromise. And with every act of negotiation and compromise, you get a little bit closer. You get a little bit closer. You integrate that part of the person to this part of your life to their life. And that's what's creating the merging over the years. But this whole abracadabra, boom, my idealized, that's what love's supposed to look like from day one. And this is what day 3 looks like. Saturn's going to give us an elixir of sober drink. And the high is not good because the high is actually a down. But yeah, anyway, let's keep moving. Poor Saturn. Well, not poor Saturn, poor us. We have to experience Saturn. I don't know what to say. Yeah, so in a sense, we're learning what actually true love is by understanding all of these parts. We're not using another person to fill a void or another situation or that domain of life to fill a void. We're actually learning how to operate from the premise of fullness, wholeness, rather than being fragmented. So it's a lesson that's unfolding itself. And this transit, it's magnificent because while Saturn's doing all of this stuff, as Venus moves into the sign of Aries, as I was saying earlier, Sun, the self, is going to conjunct Saturn. So it's like now we really get a chance to feel that lesson within our sense of self, because the Sun represents the self, soul, consciousness, ego, identity. And then after that ugly conjunction, Sun is going to come to a Kazemi point with Venus in the sign of Aries. And then when that perfects, shortly after that, Venus is going to move back into the sign of Pisces. And it's going to hit Saturn again 2 more times. So it's a long and an eventful journey, but truly one of a kind, considering all the planetary transits that are happening and the retrograde of both Venus and Mercury. So we're gonna get deep into it, knee deep, if not like neck high. We'll see. And I think I'm going to do another video as we get closer to these conjunctions, because I'm actually making this video well before, just as an introduction. But as they start to make closer conjunction, and if there's time, I hope to make more detailed videos, and as I get more feedback from people and how they're actually experiencing this on ground zero of life, make some other videos, give some stories where I have permission to give the stories, just as case studies. I feel that's so important in learning about symbols and how they transpire and unfold in our lives. But I feel that with all transits, this is something I do for myself. I use it as a moment of self-inventory, self-questioning, because I think about the challenges that they're posing, the benefits that they're bringing, the blessings that they're bringing. I think about that and I try to connect it, that part of it, I try to connect it to all the different facets that are interlocking in the present and how they stem from the past and where they're trying to go. And with hard transits, such as this one, for example, I like to do a self-inventory. Like with this transit, I am going to be asking myself some questions just to see how is it that I perceive love, conceptualize love? What are my expectations in relationships? My chart has the sign of Pisces in the second house. So this is going to be related to my family members, my true friends, for example. It's going to be related to how I receive support. And now, as a grown person, how do I support other people? How am I that pillar for other people? So it's talking about that domain of life. So now it's time for me to think about how I idealize these situations and those relationships, how I project myself, what my shadows are, for example. What were some of, because as we grow older, we become more real. Saturn becomes more functional in our charts. Saturn even represents old age. And it's sometimes good to reflect back in relation to who you were. Like, what was, for example, for me, what was my idealized version of receiving support and having supports? How has it changed? How have I grown? How have I gotten worse? Because sometimes we do get worse. Certain life situations put us in a vicious cycle or a loop or a wormhole where we just end up in a place that's even more intense and maybe even more negative. We need to become aware of these. And the transits are giving us an opportunity to do that, to self-question, self-inventory, self-exploration.